Okay.
Okay. Great. Okay, let me start my timer. Yeah, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So this is already 7:36, so let's just dive into it. So I'll go straight into the outline for this paper. I'll give you a brief introduction, and then we'll highlight the questions that this paper hopes to address. I'll give a brief scope, the background and methodology. Then we'll look at trying to understand the ritual framework for this paper. The MFM ritual space will be looked at. The MFM worship format pre-2020 and post-2020 will be looked at as well. We'll look at the question, what has changed, before drawing some concluding remarks. Now, this paper explores everyday worship right at the Mountain of Fire Miracles Ministries Church and the spiritual impact of worship format alterations to the overall sacred experience at Pentecostal ritual spaces. Aldrich's observation that Pentecostals generally believe their main purpose for attending church is to have a personal encounter with God was not only visibly projected in the services I observed. The importance and the duration of certain musical rites, including the order in which they appear, was also greatly emphasized by respondents. However, recent alteration to these rites raises some important questions, three of which this paper hopes to address. Are musical rites pivotal to Pentecostal rituals to the degree most participants claim them to be? Is there any correlation between the length of rite and the efficacy? And to what extent does non-spiritual elements impact everyday Pentecostal rite? Now, let me just say a few words on the scope of this paper. I know that when most people hear MFM, the first thing that comes to their mind is deliverance and spiritual warfare. Excuse me. While these forms of expressions have over the years been synonymous with the MFM church, they fall outside the scope of this paper, as the appearance in the ritual event being explored is extremely limited. I have written extensively on spiritual warfare prayers, warfare songs, the 1930 revivals, its featured music, and the impact it has on present-day Pentecostal churches like the MFM. I am happy to answer any related question or any from this paper when the time comes. Let's go into the background and give you a little bit of background and the methodology for this paper. I have been a keen observer of Pentecostal rituals as well as a participant. In fact, I consider myself a cultural and religious insider. And I believe that this has actually been beneficial to my research endeavors. I'll backtrack a bit. Cultural insider in the sense that I'm a Yoruba person myself, and a religious insider being that I'm a Pentecostal Christian myself. But then this gives you more insight into being critical and looking at these rituals, understanding them first of all, and then being able to critique them or look at them objectively. Rise in the 1994 study corroborates this when he mentions that even the insider ethnomusicologists, those born into the cultures they study, undergo a productive distanciation necessary to the explanation and critical explanation, understanding of their own cultures. Productive distanciation is not only characteristic of outsiders, and then the quote goes on and on. So the discussion in this paper has, one, come from a blend of productive distanciation, which is needed to carry out an objective inquiry. Number two, what I choose to call productive involvement. I will also draw on interviews and participant observation ethnography to discuss the dynamics, the beliefs, and the possible justification for the evident departure from formats that were portrayed to be unchangeable pre-2020. Now let's try to understand the ritual framework in this paper. As a pioneering work, Durkheim in his 1925 study suggested that ritual gatherings produce emotional intensity that gives participants the impression that they have been transformed. Nelson, 2012, in his chapter, The Social Construction of Religious Ritual, assessed the several definitions of ritual that exist, and asserted that most definitions tend to rely on the concept of formality and expressivity, which are primary criteria often used to distinguish ritual behaviors from other types of social actions. Scholars have since offered the third approach, which defines ritual in terms of privileged behavior, that is, action differentiated or set apart from ordinary action by the actors themselves. For example, as Pastor Oloyede explained to me during field work, he said Pentecostals are known to attribute the status of a sacred space to a regular community hall when it is being used for churches. In this paper, the term ritual draws from all these three approaches. Interestingly, among Yoruba Pentecostals, the term ritual is believed to be widely associated with pagan worship. This kind of history probably explains why Yoruba Pentecostals, especially the uneducated ones, argue that it is inappropriate to discuss Pentecostal Christianity in this manner. As I later realized, it is also something that educated clergymen do in a bid to avoid misunderstanding. Now, shown that ritual is alien to Pentecostalism, is not peculiar to Yoruba Pentecostals. Aubrey's book, Right in the Spirit, which explores ritual within Pentecostal spirituality, is that Pentecostals often engage in rituals. They refer to it with terms such as worship services, spiritual practices, among others. So in this paper, I adopt Aubrey's use of the term Pentecostal ritual to denote corporate recognized Pentecostal events. In this interpretation, events such as church services, Bible studies, revival meetings, and camp meetings may be conceived of as Pentecostal rituals, while Pentecostal rite is used to refer to portion of the service such as opening prayer, praise singing, and worship singing. The MFM Church. Now, the MFM Church, which was one of the primary fieldwork sites, started as a prayer group in October 1989, and the first meeting was reportedly held at the residence of Dr. D.K. Olukoya. By the way, Dr. D.K. Olukoya is the general overseer and founder of the church. They later moved to 60 Old Diaba Road before relocating to their current international headquarters at 13 Olasimbo Street, which is where I visited for field work, one of the sites I visited during field work. Now, this is an interesting chart. This chart shows an illustration of the MFM International Headquarters ritual space. Now, if you look at this chart, you can see pulpit A and pulpit B. Pulpit A is actually being used by the general overseer, his wife, and assistant general overseers, while pulpit B is used by other ministers. Straight away, you can see how this kind of highlights the hierarchy order within the church. Now, you can see the choir seated to the right. When it's time to minister, they come and file in front of pulpit A to minister. The shaded cones here are actually seats that are reserved for pastors, other pastors who minister during services. So if you are not ministering, you have no business being on that seat. So that also kind of gives you an idea of what goes on in that space. I should also mention that within the ritual space itself, participants assume different rules depending on what rite is in progress. Okay, the MFM headquarters worship format before 2020. Now, for the sake of clarity, I've divided the Pentecostal worship Sunday rite at the MFM headquarters into 5 sections. As you can see, you have the opening rites, you have the said scriptures, testimony, and all that. I'll just leave that on the screen while I go through a few things. Now, at one of the Sunday service rituals that I observed at the MFM International headquarters, the pastor who led the opening prayer made his way to pulpit B with an interpreter to translate from English to Yoruba. He sang a few songs before calling out some prayer points to commence the service. The ecstatic praise and worship singing at the service was led by the members of the MFM Eagle Gospel Band, that is these guys here, and it presented an opportunity for collective singing and what Mosio in his 2012 book describes as a state of deep individual emotion and collective excitement. To conclude the opening rite, Dr. Olukoya mounted pulpit A to lead the opening hymns. And please take note of this, 4 hymns were actually sung at that service. And let's go back to the chart, so I'll leave that here. Now, the hymn singing rite also presented the opportunity for collective singing, although not everyone had the hymn book, so this, the lyrics were actually screened on the projector or projected on the TV screens in the auditorium. The next rite, excuse me, the next rite in the service is the Sacred Scripture, and this is arguably the most intellectual part of the ritual because congregants are supposed to study the Bible with the aid of a manual. The testimony rite is that part of the service where people come forward, having been interviewed before. There's some bit of control being done here. They would have been interviewed, and they come out, share their testimonies or what they believe God has done for them. The announcement rite provides members of the congregation with information concerning church programs and other commitments. And at this point, also newcomers are welcomed. The Bible reading was taken by the GO's wife, and then you add other bits of the service. But then there's something I wanted to quickly point out here. The MFM Church is widely known to have a vast array of music groups and music ministry departments. During one of the services I attended, especially this one I'm actually looking at, the headquarters mass choir and the orchestra mass choir combined, and the mass orchestra, by the way, combined to minister the song Answer by Fire and One Way to God, which is an original composition by the general overseer. This is a picture I took of that performance. You have the choir and then the orchestra, and you have some of them actually going to underneath the gallery over there. Now, the question, why do music ministrations precede sermons in Yoruba Pentecostal churches, became crucial to my study. And most of my respondents believe music has been consciously itemized before the sermon for specific reasons. Citing the biblical story of Elisha, Pastor Loide argues that music ministrations bring down the presence of God, thereby ensuring the work of the preacher is easily accomplished. Pastor Kishilore appears to concur with Oloyede's theory, as she claims, and I quote, Pentecostal preachers are very smart. They know music invites the presence of God, and once God is in the midst, the work is done. So they allow musicians to sing and play for some time before they come out to preach, end of quote. This sentiment is also shared by Oluwatosin Olaniro and other respondents and scholars such as Butler 2005, who assert that pre-sermon music helps to prepare the hearts and minds of congregants to receive the word of God, which comes by the way of the sermon. After the music ministration, the general overseer mounted the pulpit again and he led the congregation in a short session of prayers before preaching a sermon titled Provoking God into Action. I should mention also that the sermon rite is the longest part of the service, or if you like, the longest part of the ritual. In line with standing practices, after the sermon, he made an altar call, and this song, I have decided to follow Jesus, which is one of the most popular songs used for this particular rite in Pentecostal churches, was done. And then you add other parts of the service coming on, closing prayers, offering was also collected, and all of that. I want to quickly say this. Now, in all, pre-2020, you can actually say that almost 85% of the rites within a Pentecostal ritual space involves music in some way. And someone might be saying, oh, how do I know this? Well, I did a study and I came up with this chart. This chart is actually loaded with a few things, but I will not be dwelling on it so much. Just wanted to point out my claim as to 85% of the rituals involving music. Now, the rites in red, automatically, definitely, those ones involve music. The ones in blue here, these actually occasionally have music in them. So if you combine those two together, most of them, they all come to about 85% of the rituals, of the rites within the ritual that involves music. Now, what has changed? Looking back at this same structure, if you look at the opening rite, limited time was given to opening prayer, praise and worship, which was about 30-40 minutes, was brought down to under 10 minutes. Opening hymns was omitted, pre-sermon music was also omitted, and a lot of things happened within that time. If you notice also that the time for the entire ritual itself also changed. So, the big question, what has changed? Because of time, I'll actually just go through a few because I know I think I have about 3 minutes left. The first thing I'd like to mention is the ritual time itself has changed. If you look at the first pre-2020, you had a ritual endeavor that would take about 240 minutes, but now it's about 90 minutes, post 2020. And then one wonders, was God angry due to the short rituals, or was the ritual experience less impactful? I'm also aware that there are some Yoruba Pentecostal churches that run ritual services of about 7 hours plus, every Sunday. Perhaps it's time to start rethinking everyday worship rites and exclude duplications, and better still, maybe alternate rites. The mass choir rehearsals also changed. Just before 2020, in a bid to reduce rehearsal costs, the music ministry sought ways to utilize technology and platforms such as WhatsApp to reduce the number of in-person rehearsals. Now, during the period under review, this approach was even more pronounced as it became almost impossible to gather such a large number of people together in a safe manner. So the heavy-handed rehearsal policy also had to be adjusted. Now, no music before sermon. Remember how respondents justified the importance of pre-sermon music and how it is indispensable to the sermon experience. Well, this was completely omitted as well. The praise and worship rite was reduced by more than 65%. This is despite the claims by my respondents that God deserves nothing short of quality, extensive praise and worship, and that a situation where the opening rite is omitted or reduced is impossible, as it would have a spiritual impact on the service. Now, here are my concluding remarks. There's no denying the fact that music plays a vital role in Pentecostal church activities. However, I argue that, as with other areas of society, the concept of change remains constant, and non-spiritual occurrence could impact spiritual endeavors. The everyday desire of Pentecostal Christians when they visit the ritual space is to have an encounter with God. However, considering what my respondent said, and which in a way kind of aligns itself with available scholarship on this subject, one wonders, does the absence of God, or does the absence of pre-sermon music mean that the presence of God didn't make an appearance in post-2020 services? If the presence of God was in fact present despite the exclusions, then perhaps it is safe to assume that these Pentecostal rituals can remain efficacious without the overuse of music or the introduction of rites that bear little on the spiritual experience of congregants. Some of these previously abandoned pre-2020 rites are beginning to resurface, And it is important that Yoruba Pentecostal churches rethink their everyday worship rites in a manner that shows spirituality embracing time management. Thank you so much for listening. And here are my references. So thank you so much for listening.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ayodeji. Please, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you for standing in. No thanks to network. I was shut out of, in fact, I was unable to log in, but thank you for waiting for it. So thank you, Dr. Ayodeji, for that presentation. Before I call on the second presenter, I'd like to quickly run through the profile of Dr. Ayodeji. Dr. Oluwafemi Ayodeji obtained his PhD from Durham University, United Kingdom. His doctoral thesis is titled Ecstasy, Holiness and Spiritual Warfare, an evaluation of Yoruba Pentecostal music experience in Southwest Nigeria. His research interest is broadly in music and Christian liturgy, with a focus on musical practices such as worship, praise, and spiritual warfare songs in Yoruba Christian ritual spaces and other Pentecostal congregations. He is interested in the intersections of music, religion, ritual, and popular culture. He is the director of the award-winning Shalom Choral. Thank you, Dr. Oluwafemi. So our next speaker is Molara Olasunbo-Oluku. She had a PhD in African music from the Institute of African Studies, University of Ibadan. Her doctoral thesis focuses on the ethnomusicological study of the liturgy of C&S Church, Ayoni, Lagos. Her research interests include Yoruba music, Yoruba church music, music education, gender, and popular culture. She has presented her research in different academic fora and has published in both local and international journals. Omolara lectures at the Department of Music, University of Education. She's a member and fellow of Association of Nigerian Musicologists and currently serving as the president of the Society of Music Educators in Nigeria. Dr. Omolara, you're welcome.
Thank you. I try to share my PowerPoint.
You can go ahead.
Thank you. My presentation, this presentation will be discussed under the following sections: the introduction with the research methodology, and then I have a brief on C&S church movement, the church female hierarchy, the gender-related doctrines in the church, women and everyday music in C&S church movement, findings, and then the conclusion. The topic of this presentation is Silent Yet Loud, Women and Everyday Music in Cherubim and Seraphim Church, Ayonio, Lagos. Introduction. The society has made the empowerment of women to be very slow and less effective based on several policies that are not in favor of women. Several scholars have made their points known. However, 2017 explained various factors that determine discrimination of women in our society, such as traditions and culture, public opinion, and religious belief, to mention few. The general belief that females were trained to help in homemaking, childbearing, and rearing, all issues pertaining to home, have eaten deep into the society to an extent that it was concluded that all females end their education in the kitchen. The unfortunate thing is that the church is not left out of this discrimination, as many women are not allowed to play equal roles as men in the liturgical activities of many churches. But I must say here tonight that things have changed all over the world today. The situation has really changed. Women are now playing prominent role, reserved structurally for men. And then tonight, my focus on this presentation is the involvement of women in everyday musicking of Cherubim and Seraphim Church. This research is guided by many scholarly works on gender and religious studies in the likes of Vicky Brennan in his book Singing Yoruba Christianity, and Oyerunke Oyewumi, African Women and Feminism. The research methodology, this research adopted few methods. I use the focus group discussion, observation, participant observation, and then telephone interview. Right now, I go to brief on CNS Church Movement Pioneer. The Cherubim and Seraphim history appropriately started with St. Moses Orimolade Tuolashe in 1925. As we all know, the church is one of the most prominent African indigenous churches in Nigeria. It's a church that is self-financed and self-supported morally, materially, and spiritually. Cherubim and Seraphim worship practices is syncretic in nature. And this is because it embraces Yoruba and Christian values and practices. There are various sections of the church. We have the internal sacred order of Cherubim and Seraphim Church. We have the praying band of the CNS. We have the Holy Flock of Christ Church. And then we have the Cherubim and Seraphim Church Movement Pioneer, just to mention a few. And the urge to remain far away from controversies and disputes brought about the formation of CNS Pioneer Movement in 1927. In 1961, the Lagos district of the church was established. Today, we have 16 districts of the church. Going to the church female hierarchy. The priesthood order of the church has an established hierarchy, which is fashioned in accordance with the church ministry. We have the praying band known as Aladura. We have the lady leader. We have the senior lady leader. We have mother in Israel. We have senior mother in Israel. We have most senior mother in Israel. We have special mother in Israel. Then we have certain gender-related doctrines and practices in the church. Number one, there are so many gender-related doctrines in the church. We have male and female worshipers sitting separately in the church. They don't sit together. And then on the delivery of male child, the mother remains unclean and must rest for 40 days. When it is a female child, the mother rests at home for 80 days. And then after resting, they can return back to church. The female members undergoing menstrual period are not authorized to go into the church. They can only stay in the surrounding of the church. And then female members are not authorized to say the prayer still at a congregational prayer meeting when an ordained male member is in attendance. Female members are not authorized to enter the chancel or altar of the church, except female children who have no sexual experiences. No female member is allowed to preach on the elevated pulpit in the churches where there are such provisions. And then female members are not allowed to preach in a Sunday morning Thanksgiving service when an ordained male preacher is present. But today, I think they can now preach where there is a provision for a particular type of pulpit for the female preacher. All these by no means relegate the position of women within the priesthood. Despite the relegation, women still play a significant role as evangelists, teachers, and prophetess in the church. Today, in CNS church movement, there is established independent women council headed by a female to be responsible for the welfare, physical and spiritual upliftment of women in the church. Now, I want to quickly, because of my time, I want to quickly run to the various areas where women play prominent role in CNS church movement among the 16 districts in Lagos. Number one, they play the role of prompter. Vicky Brennan called this hymn herald in her book, Singing Yoruba Christianity. There's usually a song leader during a service at a particular time when a congregational hymn singing is taking place. This lead singer dictates the lines of each stanza of this congregational hymn, and whereby the congregation sings along as she dictates. This role is mostly played by women in CNS church movement. And then we have women as lead vocalists in the church. Most of the singing styles in CNS gives room for lead vocalists whose voice is always louder than that of the other singers and worshipers. And then several times women play this role of lead vocalist. Almost all the 16 districts in Lagos State, I found that women play this role efficiently. They usually spur the congregation into dancing as they all respond to the soloist. And then in CNS, women are lead vocalists do chant the attribute names of God, and most often accompanied by background singing by other choir members. We also have women composers in the church. I know one thing about CNS, most of the churches, the districts I visited, I realized that women play a major role as composers. One thing about CNS church movement, nobody can claim ownership of any composition, because what they do most of the time is cut and paste. You can bring a particular song and they pick only the chorus to join to other music. So we have many, almost in all the districts that I visited, I found many women playing the role of composers. We have women as choir coordinator, which is also known as a choir mistress. For example, in Surulere district, the youth chapel, we have a medical doctor who is the music coordinator of the youth chapel. She plays this role efficiently, even in Olorun Shogo district that I've visited, and many other districts like that. I've seen women playing the role of choir coordinator. And then we also have women as instrumentalists. Despite the fact that CNS Church solely allow men to play this role. These days, I think this is one of the great changes in the CNS movement. We now have many women playing the role of instrumentalists, not only traditional, both traditional and Western musical instruments. We see women playing this role, playing the saxophone, trombone, trumpet, the drum set, the keyboard, and then some other traditional musical instruments. And then we have women engaging in everyday morning cry, that is the evangelism. Not just evangelism, you hear them singing so many Yoruba songs that are related to evangelism. Currently, there is a research going on a collection of this evangelism song. I found that women mostly go, they move around, they go around early in the morning playing this role as evangelists, not just evangelizing, they evangelize through music. And then you see them accompanying their songs with the ringing of bells, playing the bells and reading to the song. And then another thing that I need to talk about is the engagement of women in dance to the rhythm of songs being performed during worship. Women play this role. I wouldn't like to say that men don't dance, but I think in CNX church movement, the women can thrill you to the point whenever they listen to any song, see them dancing. They are dancing in expression, giving thanks to God, expressing their gratitude to God. Going to my findings. Number one, the doctrines and practices are not in favor of the women in the church. Many of the ordained women are given titles which are passive in nature. This is minister without portfolio. And then a lot of women in the church, they have lost their talent because of gender-related limitations. And then in some branches of the church, there are inappropriate and excessive use of musical instruments, which encourage immoral dancing in the church. Most of the time, musical instruments overshadow the songs to the extent that text of cannot be heard clearly. And then one thing I have noticed again is that despite the restrictions on women involvement in the church liturgy, to some extent, women are involved in everyday musicking of CNS church movement Ionio. Conclusion, there is no doubt that women in CNS church movement Ionio very loud in their involvement in everyday musicking, despite the fact that most of the doctrines and practices do not give them the same opportunity as their male counterparts. If culture has silenced women, because I know to some extent, the church is culturally bound, there is no doubt about that. But I think the church should be revolutionary about this, knowing the fact that women constitute a larger percentage of the church membership. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Malala Loko. So I'll go to the third presenter. The third presenter is Tolulope Waje. He obtained his PhD in African music from the Institute of African Studies, University of Ibadan. His doctoral thesis explores Yoruba native tradition in Christian liturgy. His research interests include Yoruba art music, Yoruba church, and popular music. Owaji has attended both local and international conferences, workshops, and seminars where he has shared his research and has published in reputable peer-reviewed outlets, including journals and chapters in books. Recently, he collaborated with some dental scholars in a project where he composed songs for the promotion of oral hygiene among primary and secondary school students. He is a lecturer at the Department of Music, University of Ibadan, and he has served as a pioneer and former head of the department. Dr. Owaje, you have the floor, please.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Chairman.
Good evening.
I want to share my screen. Okay, somebody else's screen is obstructing mine, I guess. Wonder why.
That is Dr. Luke. I think she needs to stop sharing so you can
Dr.
share
Luku,
yours.
please stop sharing your screen, Dr. Luku.
I'm not.
Thank you. It still is showing, so just disengage it.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. The title of my presentation is the Everyday Yoruba Christian Themes in Ebenezer Obey's Juju Music. I will go straight to the introduction because I have quite a bit to explore in terms of the themes of everyday music that is found, Obey's music that is found amongst the Yoruba people of Western Nigeria and even in the diaspora. Ebenezer Obey is one of the major exponents of Juju musical repertory, which covers various Christian themes such as praise, morality, and admonition, and as well as Yoruba philosophy in terms of marriage that covers marriage, work, relationship, prosperity, spiritual and economic prosperity. Contributions of music in terms of these themes engages the social and religious life of the people, the Yoruba people in general, broadly. Obey's presence and relevance in Nigerian soundscape spans over 5 decades. The aim of this paper is to examine ways whereby the use of everyday Yoruba Christian themes is engaged and implicated in the music of Ebenezer Obey and its manifestation in everyday life among the Yoruba people. Well, opposite sampling was used in selecting some music tracks of Ebenezer Obey, while content analysis was employed for the purpose of data analysis. The theoretical framework is anchored mainly on Karim Baba's theory of African popular culture in Africa as an official and non-canonical invention of living, which is determined by ordinary people and not the high profile. Aspects of everyday life that determines popular culture include popular comedy, fiction, poetry, pictures, fashion, film, and dance. These are the things that she explored in her theory of popular culture. While trendy fashion is promoted through music, videos, films, and digital media, current musical trends are disseminated through digital media. Having formed part of everyday Christian themes among the Yoruba, Ebenezer Obey therefore works together with other arts and lifestyle containing popular culture among the Yoruba. Sorry, I want to... Now, as a backdrop against my discussion of Ebenezer Obey's popular themes, Christian themes, in his Juju music, I would want to just highlight a few things to give us a backdrop to of Obey's profile of in his biography. He was born Ebenezer Obey Fabiyi, known as Ebenezer Remilekun Aremu Fabiyi, was born into a Christian family in Idogo, Ogun State on the 3rd April 1942. Started his music career as a choir boy in the church and as band leader in primary school. He trained as a secular Juju musician under Fatai Rolling Dollar, and he formed his own band, the International Brothers, in 1964. Obey later metamorphosed into the Inter-Reformers. He renamed it Inter-Reformers Band in the early 1970s. His calling into the ministry was informed by personal encounters with God, as well as encounters with Archbishop Benson Dahosa and Dr. Miles Monroe. He later began his own ministry, ministering more in music. Now, I just went through this highlight just to give us a very brief summary of Obe's um, life in terms of his panoramic view of his life as a juju musician. However, one will find that he actually started more of a secular musician, but began to realize more his calling as an evangelist. And then he began to metamorphose and then evolve into the Obe Ebenezer, known as the evangelist. However, the full detail of his biography and evolution is contained in the body of the paper. However, I want to now move on to the everyday Yoruba Christian themes in the music of Ebenezer Obey. And doing that, I will play a few excerpts of his music as I highlight the Christian themes that we find in his music, and which is being employed on almost on a day-to-day basis, whether on the radio, on television, on the social media, and then also generally in the public. His music is used on a daily basis, and they follow these various themes that I will highlight as I go along. The music of Ebenezer Obey has a large collection of Christian songs that form part of everyday Yoruba Christian themes, such as prayer, thanksgiving, praise, admonition, historical documentation, and rites of passage. Not only do these themes shape spirituality and inspire well-being among Yoruba Christians, they have become widely acceptable to the Yoruba in general, regardless of their religious affiliation. And in terms of prayers, apart from conventional prayers, the music of Ebenezer Obey provides repertory that are used on radio and television programs, especially at strategic periods such as early morning programs and during Christian-themed programs. For example, Obey's Anja de Lo, excuse me, Loni Eledumare. Need to play one excerpt briefly. Sorry, excuse me, I'm trying to go back to. Okay, for example, his Anja Dilo. Sorry, I'm trying to jumpstart my music player here so that I can play. Okay.
You may have to go on. You have 7 minutes more. Hello, Dr. Waje. You may have to go on. You have less than 7 minutes.
All right, I'm almost there. So now other prayer songs, and so on. You know, these are all themed in Christian narratives. Then the quest for the Yoruba to praise and thank God is anchored on the belief that one shows appreciation for favor will most likely get more favor. So you see him having so many songs in praise and thanksgiving. Adupe Edumare, Ebun Pataki, Edumare Shom Soromidayo, Ibafele Edumare Oba, Mujubare, Iba Messiah Oba, and so on. Ogoji Odun, and so on. So most of his music have Christian themes in them and Christian content. In terms of rites of passage, you have some songs, that, as that follows areas of child naming, puberty, birthday celebration, graduation, wedding, retirement, all pointing towards the Christian ideals in terms of the content and the narratives that this song put forth. Let me just move on so that I will not take too much time. In terms of admonition, you have one of the key areas of Christian life, which tallies with Yoruba culture. The Christianity admonition, while Christianity admonishes adherents based on the teachings of Christ, Yoruba admonishes based on ethical frameworks that is referred to in the Omoluabi for philosophy and way of life. The Yoruba Christian, therefore, admonition is both a religious and cultural exercise. You have obey its themes, tracks, Afurugbe, Fẹ́ni Kejì Rẹ, Ìtẹ́lọ́rùn, Tẹra mọ́ Àdúrà Rẹ, Bàbá Oníkẹ́tẹ́kẹ́tẹ́, Àìmàsìkò. All these, somewhere in the text of this music, you find Christian admonitions and so on. Even in the To Ìgbéyàwó Láyé Tọ́ba Olúwa mi fi sílẹ̀ pẹ̀lú àṣẹ ni, he tried to bring forth the Christian ideals in terms of marriage and so on, and then admonishing the couple, the new couple, and so on. And so on. So you have so much in Obe's music that covers this content. In terms of historical documentation, you have Obe giving, things that happen in the context of history, brings them in perspective also. And also, he will bring in some things about God, about the Christian, his own Christian ideals in this song text when you examine them critically. Now it's also source of new contents for other Yoruba Christian disobey his music in the repertory. That apart from the fact that Yoruba Christian and secular musicians adapt melodic and lyrical resources from Obe's music repository, Semi, a Nigerian female artist who is popularly known for her rejuvenation of the Owambe style, has collaborated with Ebenezer Obe in Amasiko, a music fusion consisting of Simi's original content as well as textual and melodic content with Obe's Amasiko. Well, there are many things to see. There's a lot to explore in terms of Obe's text and his music, having so much of Christian content, and which is used on a daily basis amongst Yoruba. In conclusion, being a major exponent of Juju among the Yoruba, the indelible mark of Ebenezer in the Nigerian popular landscape cannot be underrated. Most importantly is his contribution to the everyday Christian theme among the Yoruba. The music of Obe contributes to everyday themes of the Yoruba Christian in the areas of prayer, thanksgiving, praise, admonition, historical documentation, rites of passage, and in addition, the music of Obe has contributed to create new content for contemporary Juju artists and other Yoruba and Nigerian Christian and secular artists in general. This is where I stop for now. I want to say thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Waji, for that presentation. We'll take the final presenter, and then after then we take questions. Please, if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat box or in the Q&A section. So our next presenter is Oladile Ayorinde, is the Ajenlanda Music Fellow and a lecturer at the Department of Musicology and Studies, University of Bonn, Germany. Oladile is also a think that is transforming the humanities through interdisciplinary knowledge, postdoctoral fellow at the Wits School of Art and Department of Anthropology, University of Witwatersrand, Johannesburg, and a research fellow of the African Open Institute of Music, Research and Innovation, Stellenbosch University, Cape Town. He taught at Tübingen University, Germany, where he's also a Baden-Württemberg fellow. Oladile's research is set against the backdrop of South Africa and Nigeria's cultural, social, and economic contexts, with its crucial artistic, aesthetic, and sonic analytic components. His ongoing research entitled Music, Agency, and Social Transformation in Africa is located in Music Research and Research in Music as a window into the complex processes of social, political, and economic development in contemporary Africa and African diaspora, as well as Global South. Dr. Oladile, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Can I share my screen to start with then? Okay. Okay, thank you so much. So my topic for today is Fuji Gospel and Tungba Modernity, the Yoruba Christian sonic spaces and everyday Alujo pedagogies in Lagos. This research, this is just a component of what I call a work in progress. So I have recently did a research on Fuji in Lagos. I did a kind of ethnographic work focusing on Fuji. Fuji is an urban popular music genre that mixes Yoruba poetic idioms and drumming, Islamic cantillation, and aesthetic resources from Euro-American pop and from European Arab pop music. Fuji is a non-canonical expressive genre that facilitates local canonical public spheres and popular culture, as well as modernity from below. Just a very quick context to my research and the background for this particular presentation. So first of all, I am a musician. I have been part of the Fuji scenes since 2000. Yes, I remember clearly. Then before then, perhaps 10 years or some 10 years before, Fuji is part of one of the everyday landscape that in my own, growing up as a child in Lagos and across Nigeria. So from 2012-13, I went back to the Fuji scene, this time around as a musician and as a scholar, to explore what I have engaged in the past. So in this case, engaging Fuji not just as an historical phenomenon, but also as a lens to understand everyday political economy. So on that note, I studied Fuji as a musicologist, as an anthropologist, and an African popular cultural scholar. So this is one of the dynamics that I covered. So in the process, I work wearing my cap as a musician. I work with several musicians in Lagos and outside Lagos, even in diaspora, including in Germany, here in South Africa, and other places. So my work is primarily situated in what we call economic ethnomusicology. So by that, I map the political economy of Fuji. So I work with musicians at the performance space, both in their house. What I have been doing practically initially as a keyboardist with as a keyboardist with several Fuji artists for like almost 10 years, and also as a producer, as a session pianist and producer within Lagos and outside Lagos in the Fuji scene. So I did the same thing by working with big mega star Fuji musicians. I have organized tours. I work also as a cultural economics with many Fuji superstars, including Adewale Ayuba that you can see on the screen, Pasuma, Malaika, and also with K1 also to some extent. But my work with K1 was not too successful because it was too busy with political scapes in Nigeria landscape. But despite that, as he had a kind of reunion with him and his organizational team, particularly his record label, the Babala Jays. So, but in this context, my work is actually focusing on just an aspect of what I have called the everyday pedagogues in Lagos and Tungba modernity. So in this presentation, I explore everyday Yoruba Christian sonic spaces and briefly describe what the Fuji gospel and Tungba modernity means for people's everyday social and economic well-being in Lagos and beyond. I do this through what I call the Alujo pedagogue. The notion of Alujo pedagogue has two interlinked ideas. First, I mean the ways people manage nationalism in Nigeria. And second, where they manage nationalism and strategically negotiate spirituality, social and economic well-being for themselves in a country that has no plans for them. The second points to the internal logic and credentials of the everydayness of things, to use a word from our Apadurai, across spaces, church, business, buses, market, and on the streets. And suggest a micro approach to a macro understanding of power, politics, class, well-being, fame, and modernity, as well as economic structure that shape everyday life in Lagos and other African post-colonial cities. In other words, Alujo pedagogues advances Jane Geyer's idea that argument that to make sense of the political economy of everyday lives, we need to address the macro context from the vantage point of the local and micro life in Africa. Therefore, Alujo pedagogues becomes a logic through which people's everyday coping mechanisms, becoming and managing in Nigeria, is rendered intelligible. So by the idea of managing, I use the work of Paul Shawat, who has written an insightful ethnography of the Ghanaian national ensemble. So as in West African cities, managing allows to capacity to get by, but most importantly, an expression of personal agency, as people often employ the term to articulate a sense of control over their economic, political, and social challenges, and the process of negotiating these challenges to their own advantage. The act of managing among the people in Lagos is necessitated by abuse of political power and embezzlement of national funds among the Nigerian government officials. The everyday lived experience in Lagos and Nigeria as a whole is characterized by economic excess and abjection of pervasive poverty, to use a term from Wale Adebanwi. This is a context that shapes conviviality across Yoruba Christian sonic spaces, as my research suggests. Therefore, I ask, what might the role and politics of Yoruba Christian music in people's everyday life mean for our understanding of forms of self and placemaking and social and economic well-being in contemporary Lagos? What might the everyday Alujo pedagogue in Lagos mean for our understanding of placemaking, class, agency, transnationalism, and everyday life in post-colonial Africa? In engaging these particular dynamics, I want to focus specifically on aspects of this work. As mentioned earlier, I am currently writing this particular presentation as a chapter in my work in progress monograph on Fuji, on political economy of Fuji in Nigeria. So first of all, I would like to, the concept of gospel Fuji has been around since at least 1990s. And for instance, scholars like Adideji and others who have engaged Yoruba gospel music in Nigeria have actually outlined ways and forms and classification of Nigerian gospel music. So for Adideji has actually provided an interesting context for us to understand this idea. So I won't spend much time on that one. Let me focus on what really matters. To start with, I would like to play 2 video clips, or let me play 3 very short clips, then that will launch us into this conversation. Okay, I need to share again. I hope you have your earpiece. So let's listen to this. Okay. So the first one is a popular Nigerian Yoruba gospel musician and producer. So you can reach out to me for other details. So now there are 2 important aspects. Somebody said the video sound is too low. I'm sorry about that. Okay. To go back to the main business, I need to share the screen again to go back to the slide quickly.
Dr. Aride, you have 2 minutes more, please.
2 minutes more?
Yes.
I thought you said it's 15 minutes.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, no problem. Okay, to quickly go. Okay, now the 2 recordings actually points to different dynamics. Like I said, this is just to open a conversation. But the first dynamic that point to is that of the idea of modernity. That's one, and people's logic, ways of managing crisis in contemporary Lagos and other Nigerian states. So Alujo, in that sense, becomes a kind of strategic tool which the church, Yoruba Christian church, as well as other churches, are used in draw from to help people navigate everyday crisis and to negotiate well-being. So in conclusion, like Gaia's interlocutors, like Gaia's research, one of our interlocutors expressed that Kosono Miromo, that is no other way. For many who are hustling and negotiating their condition in Nigeria, there is no other way than to create alternative means of economic survival and happiness, as well as well-being, through the convivial spaces enabled by Christian sonic space. So on that note, churches, the Yoruba Christian sonic spaces, are space of conviviality where they don't only negotiate spirituality, but the basis, one of the bases of engaging that reality of Christianity is simply about economic well-being and social well-being, particularly if we read into initial ethnographies of Yoruba, like Waterman and other scholars have actually demonstrated. The Yoruba logic, and as well as other culture in Nigeria, is based on what we call asymmetric power relation, through the idea of, we can talk about ideas of consumption and forms of circulation that actually lends towards personality and ego. So in this case, the church and the Yoruba Christian space provide us with an interesting layer to understand the ways in which people negotiate this reality. And like I have argued in my ongoing work, the concept of modernity can then be rendered legible through this form of spaces where people draw on their own local logic to negotiate global ideas. Thus, Alujo Pedagogue provides Nigerians with tools of managing and a logic to understand their own Nigerianness. Thank you.
Thank you to all. Thank you, Dr. Ayode. So we have less than 15 minutes. I don't know how we're going to manage this to take comments, questions, feedback from the audience. So if you have question, you can put it in the question and answer section or in the chat box, or you can give a show. Okay, I can see Dr. Kayode Samuel. Dr. Kayode, please, can you unmute yourself? Let me, Dr. Kayode Samuel, please, can you? Dr. Kayode Samuel.
Yes. Hello. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Good. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much to all the presenters. I've actually enjoyed your presentations. I have two quick remarks on Dr. Oluwafemi Ayodele's incisive presentation. I want to say, since your discussion was conceived, at least the way you presented, along the historical prism, may I suggest that you also situate the factor responsible for the changes in what you are presenting, which I think is informed by the pandemic, that is COVID-19, because you are trying to track pre-2020 and then post-2020. I think that will also help us to understand where you're coming from. Now, two, can we, in a way, and this is like a question, explain the issue of some form of constraints in the Pentecostal rites, especially regarding time, and then in the light of power relation, wherein a form of temporary loss of power is seen on the part of the priests or the leaders who conduct these rites when they lost power temporarily, so to speak, to government. And my view is informed by the fact that despite the initial resistance by religious leaders to have their activities regulated, especially constrain their time of when they were forced to comply with government order and directives on the COVID-19 safety protocols in terms of population of congregants in the ritual space, as well as time allotted for worship. You know, in this case, the usual period which you presented, the religious rites often lasted about 4 hours, but they were forced to cut down to 2. Can we also explain this in the form of, you know, how they temporarily lost power to governments? And then finally, I'm particularly fascinated by Dr. Ladele Ayonide's conclusion about the functional roles of music within that space. And I think we can just reiterate the point within the tenets of Pentecostal religious rites. True worship does not necessarily lie in congregational assembly, rather
I think we lost Kayode Samuel. So I'd like the presenters to take notes so that when you're responding, you can respond to all the inquiries. Before I take Adejube, Dr. Loko, you have a question from Vicky Brenham. I wonder if you can say more about how you integrate Oyewumi's argument from the invention of women into your arguments. I think this will be an interesting way of pointing to how women in CNS negotiate the contradictions of gender in the church. So you will respond later. Let's have Samuel Adejube. Samuel Adejube, please unmute yourself. Samuel Adejube.
Okay.
Samuel Adejube, please. Can you? Okay, yeah, thank you.
Can I? Okay, thank you so much. I think because of network, I was only able to listen very well to the last two presentations. And I think I'm going to have the same question for the last two speakers. It was a wonderful, enlightening presentation, sirs. Since music is humanly organized, and then we were talking about Yoruba Christian music and everyday performance, both Alujo or gospel Fuji, and then the Ebenezer Obey kind of music. Can we have a social space where that among the Yoruba Christian music, where they are paramount. What I'm saying is that contemporary Pentecostals, for instance, some people frown at gospel Fuji, for instance. Some contemporary Pentecostals don't even play those, and they are in Lagos. They are in Southwest too. They are Yoruba Christian music, and they favor most of this contemporary American Western music. So can we have, or is there a way they are coming back? For instance, for experience they used to do like December. After, in the midst of several Western music artists, you will see a drop of Tope Alabi coming in, you know, just to, it's like a sprinkle of Tope Alabi in the midst of several people. So what factors can we say is responsible for that? Or is gospel Fuji or Ebenezer Obey kind of music, is it missing totally in contemporary Pentecostal churches? That's just all I want to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have less than 10 minutes, so I like each of the respondents to make it very brief and as concise as possible. So can I have, let's have Dr. Ayodeji respond to the queries. Briefly, 2 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for those comments. Actually, to put this in context, this paper is actually a direct response to happenings around the pandemic, like rightly mentioned. I guess it was just kind of taken for granted that everyone would cut the scope. Because I went on field work and everyone was saying, yes, this spirituality, this is this. Why are you doing this spirituality? Why are you doing this spirituality? As if that was the only essence. And you know, when the pandemic happened, it was more like, wow, a lot of things were unraveling, and there has to be like a discourse around, you know, that area. So you are quite spot on. It was like a direct response to what the respondent said at the time, as to how things cannot change, how spirituality controls everything and all that. And then your second point is a very interesting one, which I think, yeah, going forward, this should be put, I'll take this on board actually, the power play, and how most of the Pentecostal preachers who are big men, you know, in their own right, had that power taken from them, and they could do nothing except for one interesting man in Abuja who went ahead to hold service in the midst of the pandemic and he was arrested. So it would be very nice to look at that, you know, how that kind of played out, the power play, the government, the pastors, the congregants themselves, because some people were actually confused. Who is in charge? Is it the government? But then the Bible says, give what is due to Caesar to Caesar. So, but a very interesting point. Thank you so much for that, that power dynamics here. That will be put on board as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dr. Luko, you want to respond? 2 minutes to Brennan's question on how did you, and that if you are able to say more about how you integrated Oyewumi's argument into the invention of women into your argument. Please unmute yourself, Dr. Mrs. Luko, please. Unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself. All right, well, so that we don't waste time, can Oladile Ayorinde respond to the question raised by?
Yeah, thank you so much. The person that, thank you. So the point here is that the concept of Alutungba, Alujo, and all the proto ideas around it have changed over the years. For instance, you mentioned that there are churches where Alujo, Atungba are not welcome. I don't think that's real. I've played as a pianist in Lagos more than 20 years. And even as I speak, I still work with churches in Lagos, big elite churches situated in the Ikoyi axis. The reality is that it is not practiced directly the way it is practiced in Mushin at the Fuji Jump. There are new nuances of Tungba and Alujo pedagogue that the time does not allow us to explore yet. For instance, church praise worship arrangement, the ostinato, the new motive that references Yoruba rhythmic pattern. For now, look, if you listen to the new Fuji albums, as well as other Yoruba music albums, these are the kind of things they are also trying to, it is based on the American gospel, but you can get the nuances in ways in which it is shaped with the basic pattern, just very, very short motif and that are repeated over and over. The idea is to create kind of sense of dance. which is primary essence of Alujo itself. So the point is that Alujo is not just about the rhythm. There's also a vocal aspect, which I've called vocal surrogacy in contemporary Alujo sensibility, both outside church and within the church. So these are there are layers, new forms of Alujo and Tungba that are widespread across churches and outside the churches that people engage in their daily activities to manage Nigerian crisis. Thank you.
We have about 5 minutes. If there are few questions, we can still. I think one connecting trope in all of our presentation is this idea of continuity and discontinuities. I mean, in Yoruba Christian music, and how these are, implicated in everyday life of Christian worshipers, Christian musicians. Is there any question I've not taken? Okay, we have responded to Vicky. All right, so I think the conversation cannot be closed here. It has to continue. And one other thing I was going to ask Dr. Waje, that in the everyday Christian themes of Obey, wondering pre-Obey's his Christian experience before conversion, was he engaging these Christian themes before his conversion, or he started engaging these Christian themes after his conversion? If he had engaged these themes, Christian themes, before his conversion, what could have shaped his engagement with these Christian themes? And in what ways has he been able to use these Christian themes to speak to the socio-economic and political realities of, say, the pre-democracy in Nigeria? Dr. Waje, you would like to respond to that quickly?
Thank you.
2 minutes, please.
Well, Obey having emanated from a Christian background, I think I had always had Christian content in his music, even from, time immemorial when he started out, with the people that helped to shape his music. But all along, he had always injected Christian texts in his music. But it seemed to have gained ascendancy and gained, more prominence as the time went by, as years went by. And upon his point where he came to realize that his music was becoming a calling for him, he now kind of accelerated his use of Christian materials in his music more, and it became even more resonant as the years went by. So, well, I think it is the fact that his conviction became more accelerated as the years went by. I think that must have helped him. That must have been responsible for him, singing more of Christian music, and of course, injecting more of Christian texts in his music. Initially, he was doing a larger percentage of his music as secular, in context, in content. But as the years went by, he felt like he needed to preach more with his music, and then he felt his calling as an evangelist. He needed to use his music to project that calling. So I think that's what could have been responsible for his.
Thank you,
yeah.
thank you. I think again, this idea of continuity and discontinuity, I mean, before his Christian experience, using Christian themes, and even at the point of change from being a nominal Christian to religious person there, an evangelist, he continued preaching with his Christian theme. So I want to thank you for coming because we have less than 1 minute. Thank our audience. I want to thank members of this panel for their beautiful presentations. I hope that this conversation will continue behind the screen. So thank you all. I hope to see you next year LSA conference. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.